Made with Love by re-colligere icecreampizzer. Summary: in which Disgust falls ill, Fear takes care of her, and Envy asks a lot of questions. Disgust groaned in discomfort as she removed her sleep mask. Even if their bedroom was still dark, she struggled to open her eyes. Her groan was then followed by a cough. Everything felt fuzzy. Her movements slowed, her throat dry and scratchy. In other words, she felt gross. Disgust was trying to remember what could have made her sick the day before, but she struggled to weave out of her thoughts. It's probably because she's also waking up, on top of feeling sick. She was trying to remember when someone's head rose up above her bed. Disgust. "Hey, you all right?" came the concerned whisper of Fear. Unbelievable, this guy. Disgust thought she coughed as silently as possible, but it shouldn't surprise her that nothing ever escapes him. Also, she was sleeping on the bunk above him, but that wasn't relevant right now. She frowned at him. "Well, what do you think, genius?" "Don't come near my—" She instinctively turned her head away to sneeze, grossly, against the crook of her arm. Even if she was too busy shivering in disgust, she heard Fear mutter a quiet, "Oh," and she already knew what he was planning to do. She put up her other, less gross hand in front of Fear's face. "Just let the others know to keep their distance. I'll sleep it off, just give me everything I need. Here." She sniffled pathetically. Good thing she had tissues with her. Fear's sleeping cap drooped a little bit. His antenna must be moving underneath. Disgust. "We've been through this song and dance before. It's a lot easier for you in general," Fear gently reminded her, and she was tired enough that she couldn't roll her eyes at that. She wiped her other arm clean with some tissue. Disgust shot him a pained little scowl. She can't deny his point, but this is the one thing she overthinks a lot. It's almost like how much Fear freaks out about everything, which makes her worried he's rubbing off on her too much. To rub more salt on the wound, even Fear himself isn't that bothered about it. In fact, he's comforting her. It was strange, humbling, no, humiliating. Well, not really. He did have a knack with being soothing when he wasn't freaking out. Not that she'd ever admit that out loud. Fear must have picked up on her hesitation, and he gave her a small smile. "The soup I'll make for you will be easier to eat, you know." Disgust squinted at him. How dare he bring up the soup? Okay, fine. I'll move to your bed. Fear's smile turned into a grin. And if Disgust wasn't so preoccupied with feeling awful, she would have thought he was such a big dork. Disgust slowly sat up and shuffled to step down the ladder. Fear stepped down first, and she saw him patiently wait for her. "Just promise me to cover every little space afterwards, up and down, okay?" "Yes, I will." Fear held out his hands for her, but she shooed him away. She could handle moving down from her bed. Maybe the rest of this bedroom, too. Of course. And again, "Don't let the others come near me." "What? Why?" Disgust turned around when she realized the last line didn't come out of Fear. It seemed that he already noticed, because he was gently gesturing at Envy, freshly awake, to step back. "Disgust's just a little sick, but she'll be all right," Fear whispered. By that time, the others have started waking up, and they've noticed the commotion. Disgust sighed and weakly plopped herself on top of Fear's bed. She took her time to crawl under his covers and settle nicely against his soft mattress. Oh no! Disgust couldn't clearly see Envy, but she could imagine her big eyes widening when she said that. Disgust dramatically placed the back of her hand on top of her forehead, as if mimicking a painting of a fine Regency maiden fainting on the couch because of some disease, or from the overwhelming attention of a handsome bachelor. Or both. "Sorry, everyone. I'm not feeling very fabulous today." She sighed as she pouted, and then she shot a pointed look at Joy. Yesterday's incident took a lot out of me. Joy, who was still fixing her bed hair, widened her eyes and chuckled apologetically. "Yeah, well, you did a great job, Disgust, and now Riley doesn't have to worry about that anymore. We'll gladly cover for you today." Then Joy turned her attention to Fear. "Do we need to cover for you today too, Fear?" Disgust saw him glance at her for a bit, and then he turned to Joy again. I don't think I'll be too preoccupied, but I might not be able to run the console as much today. Joy gave him a thumbs up and a knowing smile. Yeah, we all know you've got this covered. Well, let's keep it easy and do our best, gang. Right beside Joy was Anxiety, carefully eyeing Disgust. Oh, is that contagious by any means? Disgust was about to open her mouth, but Sadness butted in. Oh, it's not terribly contagious. We just get a bit sick when we overexert ourselves. Disgust tends to be a bit more careful about these things, but it shouldn't be too bad. Guys, the faster you get out, the more time I get to rest without you guys talking. Now shoo! Disgust put her remaining energy into scolding everyone else. Her scratchy throat didn't do her much justice, but the others still obliged and started walking out the door once they were properly dressed. Each of them wished her well before clocking in, with the few exceptions of Fear, emerging out of the closet with his usual get-up, and Envy, taking out her hair curlers for the day. Disgust rolled her eyes at him. Even if Fear wasn't looking at her directly, that means you too, dweeb. Only then did Fear face her with an amused smile and a raised eyebrow. I did promise Joy I'd take care of you. Can't do that while I'm not in the room, right? She should probably be more annoyed at the fact that he gets to act like this when she's sick, but she couldn't muster the energy. In fact, it's soothing, in a sense. It's confusing. She sunk even more beneath his covers. It would actually be a lot better if you left me alone, especially since you still have to make that soup for me. Oh, you're right. Fear tapped his finger on his chin, as if in deep thought. Disgust knew him well enough that he pulled that face when he was about to be so funny, but then she saw a flash of something in his eyes. He looked away from her with a puzzling frown on his face. Envy? Fear called out. Disgust squinted at him, but he was pointedly ignoring her. Ugh. Envy walked up to Fear. Then she rocked to and fro on her heels. Yeah, Fear. I need to go to the kitchen for a little bit. Could you keep an eye on Disgust for me? If she needs anything, let me know, okay? Envy's eyes widened and sparkled. What? I get to help? Of course. I'd love to. I'll do my best. Fear smirked at Disgust as if he won something. He could get really annoying if he wanted to, didn't he? Him and his stupid, considerate self. Disgust scowled at him, but her gaze shifted to an expectant Envy. She sighed in defeat. Fine. Just maybe wear a mask around me? It must feel nice being taken care of. Disgust slowly opened one of her eyes to look at Envy, who was sitting on a stool a few steps away from Fear's bed. She scoffed. Obviously. I would love to be pampered all day, actually, but I can't enjoy it when I feel bleh. Disgust stuck out her tongue at that, and I don't want to be fussed over like this. Envy tilted her head to the side. Why not? I think Fear's the only one really looking out for you, and you keep pushing him away. Of course that's the question that gets brought up. Disgust scowled. See, that's the thing. I'd expect him to be more cautious around me. But he's standing too close. He's supporting me. I'm literally sleeping in his bed. She gestured wildly at the position she's in. He's infuriating, irritating, and careless. You'd think he'd be freaking out about this and all. Envy scrunched her eyebrows in deep thought. Disgust couldn't see her mouth behind the mask, but she's probably doing that thoughtful pout she does often. But he's done this before, hasn't he? Envy piped up. Joy seems to know how this usually goes. I think you should give him more credit. I mean, I wish I could be as thoughtful and brave as he is. Disgust blinked at her, dumbfounded, not expecting Envy to say that. Though it's not like she didn't already know all this, it was still a surprise. Plus, someone describing Fear's actions as something brave, when it was better seen as, well, stupid. Somehow that sent her mind reeling. She sputtered her reply, suddenly at a loss for words. He has done this before, but why do you push him away then? Disgust drew her eyebrows together as she gripped Fear's covers in one hand. Envy's terribly insistent when she wants to be, but for some reason she's struggling to reply. Wasn't it obvious? Hey, it's not that I don't trust him, or whatever it quote s that whatever she was about to say, it died on her lips. A familiar, gut-wrenching feeling bubbled in her chest, making her flinch and cover her mouth. Great. As if her day couldn't get any worse. She was so focused on trying to keep herself from puking that she didn't notice Envy step dangerously close towards her. Only when she said something did Disgust shoot her a warning look. Oh my gosh. Disgust. Do you need to go to the bathroom? Are you okay? Envy asked, slightly panicked. Do I need to call Fear? Oh, I wish I knew half as much as he does. Disgust tried to swallow the last of whatever that was, and she breathed a sigh of relief. When she spoke, there was a slight tremble to her voice. No, it's fine. I just need a glass of water, please. Preferably hot. And step back. Envy skittered backwards to the door as fast as she could. Yes, ma'am. Right away. She was about to leave, and realized she was too short to reach the door handle. Disgust watched as Envy threw her hands in exasperation before she took her stool so she could reach the handle. Finally, Envy opened the door, stepped down her stool, placed it aside, and stepped out. The silence that followed helped Disgust calm down and relax, but Envy's words stuck to her more than she expected. She felt a little more sick, and she massaged her head for some relief. A worrying thought entered her mind, which made her sink more into Fear's bed. Envy's going to tell Fear about this, isn't she? While Fear was tying the apron ribbon around his back, he heard frantic but light steps getting slightly louder toward his direction. As he expected, Envy entered the kitchen. Though she looked a bit frazzled, Fear glanced at Sadness, who was getting all their drinks ready. She also looked confused. Hey, Envy, what's up? Did Disgust ask for something? Fear gently asked her. Envy took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, she said she wanted a mug of hot water. She was avoiding Fear's gaze, which didn't escape his notice. The way she bit the bottom of her lip was also unusual. Envy, did something happen? Fear gently, but firmly, asked her. Envy's wide eyes snapped right back at him, and he could tell it was brimming with something. She wrung her fingers together, seemingly trying to hype herself up. Yes, but don't freak out, okay? Fear nodded once. He was already too freaked out to say anything. Envy sighed nervously. Disgust. She suddenly looked like she was gonna barf for a second, but only for a second. She looked fine afterwards, but I don't know. That's normal, right? Normal for what she has. A stretch of silence followed Envy's words, but Fear's mind was on overdrive. He couldn't say anything, or move for that matter. So many possibilities sprouted in his thoughts, as if he was suddenly ripped out of his comfort zone, and now he's tumbling down into the unknown. Disgust, that's not normal. No. Sadness took the words out of his mouth. Envy gasped at that. She must have looked as panicked as he was. But Disgust, she gets nauseous easily. It could have been something else. What happened before that? Fear tried to push aside his panic for now. Sadness had a point there. Now both of them were waiting patiently for Envy, who was playing with the elastic of her mask. She stuttered as her gaze shifted between Fear and Sadness. I think we were just talking. She had been laying in bed the whole time when you left the room. She pointed at Fear when she said that. And I'd been looking after her, like you said. She didn't do anything else. Sadness adjusted her glasses. She continued with that soothing voice of hers. What did you guys talk about? Envy pursed her lips in a straight line, and she stared at Fear for far longer than he was expecting. She looked at his face, then she looked at his apron. She probably didn't mean anything by it, but her gaze felt suffocating. Then, Envy turned to look at Sadness. I was asking her why she kept pushing us away when she's sick. She pouted, her eyebrows scrunching together. I told her Fear's doing so much for her, and yet she's also trying to keep her distance. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Fear's eyebrows shot up at that. He felt his face heat up, and he gawked at Envy's straightforwardness to ask Disgust a question so direct, though to be honest, he's never asked questions himself. He turned to look at Sadness, who had an eyebrow raised at him. She had an unusual expression of, well, it was as neutral a face that Sadness could pull, but for some reason he thought he saw a strange twinkle in her eyes. I'm not sure yet, but she might be all right. Sadness turned around to fill Disgust's mug with hot water, then set it next to a tray with some medicine on it. I'll get this to her and I'll ask more questions. You can help Fear here if you'd like. Fear was still trying to process what on earth Sadness meant by, well, everything. But the moment he blinked himself back to reality, she was already gone with the tray. He looked at Envy, who returned his confused look. Envy swung her small legs while she sat on the edge of the countertop. She had asked Fear to bring her up there while he readied the stovetop and the ingredients. He usually didn't mind the company, but he hasn't really spent too much time with Envy, at least not without Disgust. So, what are we doing? Fear was in the middle of washing the chopping board and knife when Envy asked that. Making some soup for Disgust. When any of us gets sick, any one of Riley's comfort foods goes a long way. We don't really know how it works, but it might be because of the feelings and memories they bring that make us feel better. Envy's eyes grew wider as she scanned the ingredients sprawled in front of her. Oh, and this is gonna be like Mom's chicken soup? Fear beamed at Envy as he rinsed the chopping board and knife a bit. Yep, it's one of our favorites to eat. Disgust loves it in particular. He washed the vegetables next. Then he went to cut up the carrots and onions cleanly. Envy watched him work, though she must have noticed the absence of one certain vegetable. Doesn't Mom put celery in the soup, though? Fear set aside the vegetables. He then filled a pot with a certain amount of water, of which he set on the stovetop. Oh, she does. Disgust just doesn't like celery. He sighed, scratching his cheek slightly. Oh, and she'll only eat a certain part of the chicken, and she'll only eat it with the right amount of broth and seasoning. That's a lot. Envy's head started to spin at all the minute details. Does it all matter? Fear shrugged. We're only really working on the concept of cooking. The nutrients don't mean as much as the feeling it evokes. At least, I think that's how Sadness described it. Disgust is just a picky eater, I suppose. He smiled a little bit to himself at the thought. Envy said a little, "Oh," with her little head nodding to his explanation. Would it be all right if I had some of that soup too? Fear nodded. I don't see why not. He let out a little chuckle when he saw Envy hop in her place on the countertop. Yay, yay! Envy cheered excitedly. Oh, someday I wish I could be as good of a cook as you are, Fear. Could I help right now? With that, Fear looked at her with wide eyes. He grimaced slightly, as much as he didn't want to make her feel bad. There was a reason why he's the only one cooking for Disgust. Memories of her turning down everyone else's handmade recipes flashed in his mind. Love the enthusiasm, but you could help next time. Fear smiled at Envy carefully. Disgust. She's got a particular palate. She'll immediately know if something's off. She's tough to please. Despite his best efforts, he watched Envy deflate at that, the sparkles in her eyes fading away as she sat on the countertop. The sigh she made, however dramatic, still made him flinch. He frowned and muttered sorry. Under his breath, it's fine. I don't think I could impress Disgust like you could anyways. Envy made a little pout, though Fear couldn't tell if it was light-hearted. Her constant comparison with herself was also something new to him. They sound like compliments, but she ends up putting herself down in the process. He didn't know how to respond to that. Eulot. Without a reply from Fear, Envy looked at him intently and continued to prod. You're doing so much for Disgust, and yet she pushes you away. Do you know why? Fear raised his eyebrows, surprised at Envy's question. She's certainly very upfront. I don't, he muttered as he tried to collect his thoughts. The thing is, he had some idea, but he hasn't done anything to confirm it. Disgust was incredibly hard to read most of the time, They sometimes find each other on the same page, but it's hard to tell when they do and when they don't. He could only guess. Disgust is really mindful of sicknesses in particular. Well, aside from me, of course. He smiled to himself as he set the chicken on the chopping board. She's extremely serious about the spread, the symptoms. It's probably why she keeps getting annoyed at us, because we're not taking this as seriously as she is. He chuckled lightly. When he didn't receive an immediate reply, he looked at Envy. She was staring at him, and suddenly he felt the urge to backtrack. What on earth was he saying? Well, I'm not really sure, you know. I've never really asked her. Envy squinted at him afterwards, and Fear could feel his antenna coil uncomfortably into itself. He's not sure why, or how. Envy must have picked up that observant leering from Disgust. Somehow Envy's stares were more judgmental than Disgust's, though it's probably because he's used to Disgust looking at him more. Well, why haven't you asked her? Envy was still staring at him, but she walked up to his place on the countertop. Fear dropped his shoulders a bit. Now that she was closer, he could see her eyes better. They looked less judgmental and more curious. Maybe he was just imagining the pressure. Fear sighed as he started to slice the chicken meat in pieces. It's hard to get a straight answer from her sometimes, especially when it comes to how she really feels. She could be brutally honest about what she dislikes, sure, but everything else is a mystery underneath that snark. He frowned, taking good care of cutting off the breast part as neatly as possible. I've grown used to it, but this is, I don't know, strange. I've taken care of her in all but one of the times she's gotten sick, and she's still stubborn about taking care of herself, which she did once, and didn't work, by the way, and yet she acts like I couldn't. I can do things. I'm competent. Those words were spoken through gritted teeth now, and he was slicing faster than he must have realized. It's like she couldn't trust me with... His knife made a stronger impact against the chopping board than he intended to. He jumped at the sound it made, a phantom of a heartbeat hammering against his chest. Did he really get that carried away? He shakily set the knife down next to the chopping board to collect his thoughts. When Fear looked at Envy, she looked just as surprised as he was. She had a hand on her chin, but it was probably covering her mouth at one point. Oh my gosh, are you okay? Fear took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, sorry I startled you. He dragged a hand over his face, which settled on his cheek. He could see his wide eyes on the surface of the knife, staring back at him. It's rather unlike him to be this careless, especially with a dangerous utensil. He had stronger feelings about this than he realized. Envy frowned and looked down. No, sorry, I brought it all up. I just wanted to know... Silence fell upon them as Fear collected his bearings. He was staring at Envy, who sat back on the countertop with a sad thwump. He frowned at the pitiful sight. For all intents and purposes, Envy was just trying to understand Disgust. Perhaps she just wanted to be involved in helping. And Fear, he wanted to understand her too. He really, really does. Fear wanted to say something to fill the silence, but he didn't know what. It's not that he didn't like taking care of Disgust, or anyone else for that matter. Really. He fussed a lot, that's his thing. He's worried about the people close to him. He liked seeing them feel better. Does Fear feel like she doesn't appreciate all the work he does for her? He shook his head. He knew that wasn't true. Disgust rarely ever says her thanks, sure, but what he gets in return was infinitely much more memorable. The way she smiles softly at him, the way she teases him slightly in that tone she never uses anywhere else, the way she flutters her eyes in relaxation after she finishes his soup, the way she goes easy on him when she feels better, the way she'd help him quell his fears when it got overwhelming. It made him feel warm and content and satisfied, and it didn't escape his notice that she never seems to do this to anyone else. What makes Fear frustrated was that, despite all this, Disgust was always adamant on refusing his help right from the start. Does she not trust him? Even after all that? She showed her appreciation, yes, but not before she made a fuss about him keeping his distance from her. It just made his head hurt. Was he making assumptions? Was he just seeing things? He didn't want to argue with Disgust all the time. Fear opened his eyes and realized he needed to put the ingredients in the pot. He scrambled a little to dump all his chopped ingredients into the boiling water. He then covered the pot with a lid, and afterwards he leaned his elbow close to where Envy sat. I just want to let her know things are okay. Fear finally broke the deafening silence, and that she doesn't have to do this alone. I don't know why she always insists on it. Envy then tilted her head as she stared directly at him. Her eyebrows drew together slightly, and she pouted. Fear raised an eyebrow at Envy, deep in thought. He's curious about what's going on in her head, but he let her ponder in silence. The sound and sense of the soup permeated the atmosphere in the meantime. Nisiti, you know what? I think you should talk to Disgust, Envy finally said with a smile on her face. Because I know for a fact that she trusts you, so she must have some other reason for not letting you near her. He straightened up in surprise. What? Envy already saw through Disgust? What did she know about her that he didn't? He sputtered nervously. What? How would you know? Envy giggled mischievously in response. Since Fear was still leaning on the countertop, she walked up to him and patted his arm. Word of advice. Asking questions does get you somewhere, you know. Fear knitted his eyebrows together. Man, was he that much of a coward he didn't even try? Even if she almost threw up afterwards. Envy muttered that last sentence so quietly, Fear didn't understand her. What? What was that? Hey, I think your soup is almost done. I want to try it, please, please, please. She blinked at him innocently as she pulled on his sleeve. Obviously, this was a trick to get his attention elsewhere. Still, Fear chuckled and adjusted his position. All right. Give me a second. Better to find out for himself later. Fear held the bowl with 2 mitten-covered hands as he walked outside the kitchen. Following behind him was Envy, slurping a storm from her own bowl of soup. She happily licked her lips from the meal. Oh, this is so delicious, she exclaimed. I hope Disgust likes it too. Fear chuckled softly at that. He also hoped she'd like it, but his mind was somewhat preoccupied already. Formulating what questions to ask was hard enough, but questions to ask Disgust was something else, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, because he's been her friend and co-worker for as long as he can remember. He should know what to say to her by now. Missy, right? Before long, Fear and Envy were in front of the bedroom door. Fear balanced the bowl on one hand as he carefully opened the door. Within the room, his eyes immediately landed on Disgust as she held her mug, and Sadness sitting on a stool next to her. Both of their eyes met Fear's, and they eventually looked at Envy as well. Hi, soup delivery. He smiled as he entered the room. It's got raving reviews already. Envy ran into the room and hopped on her feet. It's so good, Disgust. You have to try it. He saw Sadness and Disgust exchange a look, before Sadness patted Fear's covers and stood up. She locked eyes with Fear and returned his smile with a small one. She's been waiting for you. Then she gestured for Envy to come closer to her. Envy, Disgust might need some space. We can wait outside. Envy deflated a little at that statement, but she obediently followed Sadness out of the room. Before Envy left, she turned to Fear and gave him a thumbs up and a very unsubtle wink. Then she closed the door behind her. Fear smiled at her attempt to support him, though he heard Disgust scoff behind him. What was that all about? When he turned around, Disgust had an eyebrow raised. Fear chuckled as he approached her, taking Sadness's seat on the stool. Envy being Envy, I suppose. Don't mind her. He reached out to get Disgust's mug, and in return, he handed her the fresh bowl of soup. Once he had his hands free, he took his mittens off and set them on his blanket. It's a little hot. Do you need the mittens? Disgust felt herself smile the first time that day, first at the soup, then at Fear. It certainly felt hot and fresh. She shook her head. I'll be all right. Silence fell upon them then, as Disgust gently blew on the soup. The steam moved gently against her puffs. Fear leaned against the railing on his bed as he sighed, rubbing his neck with his hand. He seemed to be more restless than usual, but that could be Fear just being Fear. So, are you feeling better? What did Sadness say? He asked, stealing a shy glance at her. Disgust sighed. She knew this was going to be mentioned sooner or later. She still couldn't believe Sadness was able to figure out the cause of her nausea, and she wasn't even there when Disgust felt it. Envy must have told her about it when Disgust wanted some water, though it's possible that Sadness must have known for a while now. She knew Sadness was perceptive, but Disgust didn't realize the extent of her friend's talent. She carefully read his face. Envy must have told Fear about it too. How could she not? She said I'll be fine. She also gave me some advice on how to feel better. Fear tilted his head then, and slightly leaned towards her. Did she figure out what caused it? She blinked at Fear, and bit her lip in uncertainty. Sadness's words from earlier echoed in her mind. I know it's hard for you to let it out, but you need to get the message across somehow. I don't think he's aware. This and Fear's questions made her think. He must know something. She felt her stomach turning at the thought of, oh God, not right now. She brought a spoonful of soup to her mouth in an attempt to quell that discomfort. The warmth and the flavor instantly moved through her very being. She closed her eyes as waves of comfort washed over her, and she leaned against Fear's pillow in relief, exactly how she liked it, and exactly how he did it all this time. Well, almost. The more she let it settle in her mouth, a tinge of saltiness stood out. She blinked and glanced at Fear. When she pursed her lips, his smile suddenly disappeared, and he started to look worried. Oh no. Did I mess it up this time? I swore it tasted fine earlier. I'm really sorry, Disgust. I can make another. Disgust reached out her hand and frantically shook her head. No, wait. It's fine. You dork, I mean Fear. The soup tastes wonderful. You must have worked so hard on it. Thank you. Fear froze at that, comically slack-jawed and wide-eyed. He blinked at her as if she said something unbelievable. Disgust quickly realized that, yes, she really did. You thanked me? Fear sputtered. His demeanor instantly changed as a smile erupted from his face, and his antenna perked up. He stared at her with those big, sparkling eyes of his. Disgust rolled her eyes at the ridiculousness of the situation, though she couldn't help but smile. After all, she's mostly to blame for putting them where they were right now. Oh, don't look at me like that. You're terribly easy to please, aren't you? The words flew out of her head before she could process what she said. Fear laughed half apologetically. Sorry, it's not always that I get to hear you. Well, that meek little laugh made Disgust freeze. She shut her eyes tight, frowned to herself, and brought her hand to squeeze the bridge of her nose. Ugh, wait, no, don't say sorry. I should say sorry. She heard some movement beside her, and she felt the pressure of Fear's hand right next to her arm resting on the bed. His plush blanket sank a little bit. Disgust, are you feeling all right? Do you need to rest? You've been acting a little strange. Disgust had the gut feeling of blurting out, is it because I said thanks and sorry for the first time? Back to back. But she thought better than to say that. Instead, she groaned, making her displeasure known. After all this, Fear's still so concerned for her. She opened one eye to look at the soup, its warmth spreading on top of her lap where it sat. That must be it, then. She ate a few spoonfuls of soup, and she let the flavor settle. Then she took a deep breath and huffed. Sadness figured it out. I don't know how long she's known about it, but I have a bad reaction to... She sighed in frustration. It didn't feel like she was going to vomit anymore, but it was still hard to find her words. She looked at Fear, who was patiently waiting for her to finish. His eyebrows were drawn together, and he was gently rubbing his thumb against her forearm. That damned stare of his. It was disarming. I can't be sincere about my own feelings without feeling like I'm gonna throw up. She laughed, incredulous by the way it sounds. But she's lived her life like this for so long. It's so stupid. She watched as the realization seemed to dawn on Fear. He mouthed a silent, "Oh," as he blinked in surprise. It took him a while to respond back. "It's not stupid. I mean, if anything, it makes sense for you." "Well, hey, so I don't think it's stupid at all. I understand perfectly. You don't have to force your feelings if it's uncomfortable. You can just finish your soup and get some rest." "No, Fear. I need to say this," Disgust firmly said, as she held his hand in his gaze. It certainly stopped Fear from prattling on. If she doesn't get this over with soon. "Envy said something about me almost throwing up, right?" He frowned and nodded. He rubbed his neck a little. "She said something about, me?" A nervous laugh escaped his lips. "Envy's surprisingly upfront about things. On that note, I was just about to ask." Disgust tilted her head at him, a silent sign to go further. She took more sips of her soup as she waited. She watched his irises dart around the place, a clear sign that he was a bit nervous. Some part of her wondered if she made him scared to ask her anything in the first place. His expression changed from jittery nervousness to sudden focus, as his eyebrows drew together, and he locked eyes with her. "I want to know why you keep insisting to push me away, when all I want is to help you get through this." He gently tightened his hold on her hand. His particles felt warm against hers. "Don't you trust me? If you don't, what else can I do to earn that trust?" Disgust sighed at that. Yeah, she had a feeling he was going to ask that. She ate more of her soup before taking a deep breath and exhaling. She focused her thoughts. "She can do this. Fear, if I trusted you any less, I wouldn't have allowed you to do the things you did for me. Especially this." She held up her hand that was holding his, to emphasize her point. Fear straightened up and frowned. "I don't understand." The stomach-churning feeling came back, and it was much more intense than she was prepared for. She gripped Fear's hand to help her focus, but she ended up feeling so dizzy, she had to shut her eyes tight. I just... Disgust scrunched her nose in annoyance. Why can't she just spit it out? She felt Fear move beside her, and then the familiar smooth surface of her mug was nudged against her hand. Carefully, she opened her eyes and took her mug, her fingers gently brushing against his hands. Slowly but surely she drank more, and her feelings settled in again. Thoughts of rewording some things entered her mind. Fear seemed to be growing more concerned for her. With a heavy sigh, she collected her thoughts again. "You've rubbed off on me too much, you dork." As she expected, he looked even more confused. But she continued before he could get a word in. I don't trust myself enough to feel safe, all right? It's like you can do everything right. But there's always a chance in the back of my mind that I'll make you sick somehow. And it's not because you didn't do enough. It's that She stumbled a little on her words, but she shook her head and continued. "Just that small possibility makes me feel like shit, that you'll get hurt because of me. And I'd rather spend the day nursing my own headaches if it meant you're safe. All of you." Nausea threatened to spill over, but disgust swallowed her pride, and she finally got to the point she wanted to make. "And it's because I care about you, goddammit." As soon as she let go of the last word from her mouth, she lurched forward involuntarily. Fear, ever considerate, took out one of his emergency paper bags from beneath his bed. She forgot he had those things. It's been a while since she saw it, and handed it over to her. "Well, that's some sweet relief." Disgust groaned, her tongue sticking out after that whole ordeal. At least she was able to spill it out, for better or for worse. She did feel considerably lighter afterwards. She glanced at Fear, who was holding her mug and her bowl in his hands. His eyes were trained at her, and he waited for a bit before he opened his mouth. Feeling better? Despite how disheveled she must have looked, she nodded silently. She was feeling better, from the sickness that got her bedridden, and from the whole being honest thing. The fact that she didn't make a mess on Fear's bed made it a little more bearable, though she sheepishly handed Fear the paper bag she just used. Fear sighed, and he rubbed Disgust's back gently as he took her bag. "That's, Sorry that you had to go through that. She grumbled a bit. You didn't do anything. Don't be sorry. I wanted to do this. It's the least I could do, compared to how much you have to deal with my... Her hands gestured vaguely to herself. Everything. Fear drew his eyebrows together again. He frowned. I never once thought of you as a burden, Disgust. Disgust used to be thankful she wasn't as sappy as certain people, but the softness of his tone, unwavering and careful, hit her like a ton of bricks. It was almost unbearable, the way those words made her feel warm inside, like the soup he made for her. And I get what you mean. I'd do the same if I were in your place. You know, do things by myself so others don't have to be in danger. Fear smiled at her, his gaze softening. You know me, Disgust. I'm well aware of those risks. Disgust stared at him, incredulous, disbelieving. What? Then why go through all the trouble of taking care of me? He chuckled softly. It's simple, really. I care about you too. She was rendered speechless then. It was just as simple as that, wasn't it? Perhaps Envy was right about him. Everybody does, you know. I still get scared, but I know it's less scary if you're not alone, and I'd rather do that instead of caving into my fear. Oof! It's an awkward position, but Disgust couldn't care less. She didn't know if she'll have another chance after this. Her arms wrapped around Fear's sides and she squeezed him gently. She buried her head into his chest and pulled him closer to her. She felt him catch his breath after she basically headbutted into him, before Fear could even return the hug, and before he could properly process what was happening. Disgust pulled herself out of it, shaking her hands vigorously as she did so. She wailed pathetically. Everything's just so overwhelming to her right now. She just hugged someone. She hugged Fear. The fact that she enjoyed the contact made her feel even more disoriented. She doesn't know how the others handle this sickeningly sweet sappiness. Suddenly, she leered at Fear with an intense frown. She jabbed her index finger on Fear's chest, her teeth gritted tight. Promise me you won't speak of any of this to the others. His amused, confused smile would have been insulting if it weren't for the fact that it was unbearably dorky, unbearably cute, unbearably him. Okay, I promise. I'm not sure if I'll get used to this side of you. Good thing I won't be like this often. She rolled her eyes at him, though she can't help but smile as well. Fear handed her the mug, and what remained of the soup had cooled a little. But she didn't mind any more. Inexplicably, she still felt the warmth when she finished the rest of the soup, the same warmth she knew whenever Fear made her this exact dish. Only now did she realize what that warmth truly meant. She held his hand again, gently caressing it. Fear looked at her as if she was the world. She hoped the way she was looking at him made him feel the same. But seriously, thank you for everything. She won't be like this often, sure, but the more she thought about it, she could get used to this.